Scott Ritter, let's start. Well, let me ask you this before I get to what I think's the big story. You're Scott Ritter. What's the big story that we need to start off with in 2023 for the Ukraine conflict?
Big story is that Ukraine's been pretty much told it's not going to receive the material support that it claims is necessary to not only defend itself from continued Russian missile attacks, but also to be able to carry out the kind of optimistic offensive operations that many of their leaders claim they're preparing for in March. General Zaluzny said it best when he, in an interview with The Economist, he said, I can beat these guys, meaning the Russians. I disagree, Zaluzny. You're not. But you're a military guy. Okay, that's cool. You think you can beat them. But then he put down the qualifiers. I need 300 tanks, 500 armored fighting vehicles, 500 artillery pieces, and unlimited supply of ammunition. And he's not going to get it. So then we come to his own conclusion. I'm not going to beat these guys. So, that's where we stand right now. Meanwhile, Russia's finalizing its the mobilization of the 300,000 reservists. We still have 175,000 yet to make it to the zone of operations. These are troops that have are being organized into combat formations, battalion tactical groups. It appears they're being equipped not with old antique Soviet era equipment, but straight off the production line, brand new advanced Russian tanks, artillery systems, infantry fighting vehicles, these 10 to 15 division equivalents. Ukraine has no response to this. The West has no response. And, it's getting that time. And I'll also say this, this Russian offensive isn't, I believe, going to be a long time in coming. And what I mean by that is you've trained for athletic events. I have. I don't claim to be some great athlete, but like anybody who wants to do something, you step up your training so that you reach maximum potential game day.
Yep.
That's it, game day. And we all know that if you reach maximum potential game day and you delay the game a week, you're not going to be as good in a week as you are on that day that you've reached maximum potential. You're going to start to degrade. And if you wait a month, even worse. The Russian military right now is building up these forces, and they're going to arrive in theater at the best condition they're in, ready to go. And if I know this, the Russian leadership knows this, and I don't think there's going to be some mulling about. They've been mobilizing these troops for months now. I think they have a pretty good idea on how they want to use them, where they want to use them, what they want to achieve. And I don't think they're going to waste any time in moving in that direction once these troops arrive. So I think we're getting to crunch time, and things are going to start developing on the battlefield rapidly in a very decisive manner.
Well, every other day in the Washington Post and the New York Times, the Russians are running out of missiles, and we're seeing the largest missile strikes in the recent weeks that we've seen yet. You are a person you've been in the Soviet Union, what is now the Russian Federation. You've seen their missile facilities, production facilities, things of that nature. What we're hearing now is that there's a ramping up of the Russian military industrial complex. There's a dramatic increase. They're saying they're going to put a lot more military people, formations, et cetera, along the border with Finland, et cetera. They're building up a dramatic defensive capability at a time when NATO, it's like they're going in the opposite direction. NATO's screaming, I'm out of tanks. I can't give them more of this. I can't give them, I don't know. I can only build this many a month, and they use them up in 2 days. What do you make of Russia's in military production and capability, and as in the context of what's going on with NATO's military production capabilities?
This would make a fascinating PhD study, and if I ever decide to go back to school and do something like that, this could be something. But basically, a comparative analysis of the the defense industry systems, establishments of the West and Russia. During the Cold War, both systems were running on all cylinders. And one of the claims made by the West is, especially those who are people who embrace Ronald Reagan, is that by Reagan's massive defense expenditures, which everybody acknowledges, broke the bank. We started deficit spending, huge amount of spending, et cetera. But that our economy could take it. The Soviet economy couldn't. And history seems to reflect that. I mean, it's not that the Soviet economy couldn't. The Soviet economy, defense industry, being subjected to the strains of perestroika. So it was a self-inflicted wound.
Yeah.
I mean, there's many communists that say, hey, if you just let the sleeping dog lie, we could have continued this system. We weren't going to collapse. It's just that our people weren't going to prosper, that we had put, all this. But the idea that the Soviet Union was going to collapse by continuing defense spending is absurd. The idea that the Soviet Union wouldn't be able to break through out of the lethargy of the Brezhnev era and become an advanced society, that's probably the case had they continued. But perestroika destroyed both. It destroyed the defense industry and it destroyed the Soviet society. So it's not that Reagan won so much as the Soviets lost. But be that as it may, when the Soviet Union collapsed, you had many of these industrial cities, these defense towns like Votkins, where I was, that were solely centered on defense industry, on the production of a given item. Russian defense spending plummeted. I mean, when Boris Yeltsin first came in, there was literally no money going out to defense industry. And had this been a Western economic model, these companies would have shut down, shuttered up, and been gone forever. But they didn't, because they couldn't, because you can't shut down that which keeps a city alive. And one of the untold stories is how Soviet defense industry transitioned into Russian defense industry and sustained its capacity not only to produce equipment, but to carry out some of the most advanced research and development into future military technologies with no budget whatsoever. And then the transition from the state-owned enterprises into what they call a joint stock company, which is a sort of this amalgam of private investment, a private business, and the state, because it's defense industry. They have created these joint stock corporations that have become fiscally viable. They make money, and they make really good stuff. And more importantly, they kept intact and they modernized the production lines that the Soviet Union had. So the Soviet Union's capacity to produce military goods never went away. Never went away. It was there dormant, and they had it continuing to produce things. They produce aircraft, advanced aircraft, in smaller numbers than we do because they don't fund it, but they're still producing them. And if they ever get the money dedicated, they can ramp up that production. They have parallel lines of production that are, lying dormant that can be rapidly brought into play. And we're seeing that right now with tank production lines, weapons, et cetera. We're seeing defense lines that had been converted for one purpose being reconverted to another seamlessly, almost effortlessly by the Russians without a dramatic impact on the civilian economy. So this wartime mobilization of defense industry is being done without any meaningful impact. It's not like, Ford during World War II stopping altogether the production of automobiles and only producing tanks. Defense industry produces what it does. Civilian industry produces what this does, and they're still going. As Putin said in a recent speech, this isn't about trading guns for butter. I mean, we're not giving up butter to get guns. We can do both, and they are doing both. Now we come to the West, where we had these defense industries that existed only because the tax, the tax base had been, structured so that a tremendous amount of money was invested into defense industry. and everybody was looking for the peace dividend. And we started shutting down capacity. We started redefining, what we needed, what we wanted, and we weakened ourselves. And today we're in a situation where, again, because of the last 20 years being focused almost exclusively on low intensity conflict, we've sort of forgotten how to design a tank. We've forgotten how to design an armored fighting vehicle. Just ask the British. They've spent a lot of money on building this new armored fighting vehicle. I can't remember the Python or something like that. And the Germans did the same thing. I think the Germans built 18 of them, and then they went out and they exercised them, and all 18 broke. We don't know how to do this anymore because we haven't had the urgency. We've been doing what we do best, which is putting a lot of money into very expensive toys that look good on paper, brief well to politicians, but don't function in the field because we don't go to the field anymore. Everything stays in the barracks. And now we're waking up to the fact that, holy cow, there's this thing called large-scale ground combat in Europe again. We thought it would gone away forever, and it's there. It requires tanks, armored fighting vehicles. It requires artillery systems that don't break. I mean, we sit here and brag about the M777. It breaks. It's not built for this kind of combat. It's built to fire a couple rounds downrange at terrorists or insurgents. It's not meant to pound out hundreds of rounds a day, thousands of rounds a day, because it breaks and it's hard to repair. Same thing with the French Caesar system. It's so sexy. It's on wheels. It moves. It does everything, and it breaks, and they can't repair it. Our defense system in the West is fundamentally broken. We produce garbage, expensive garbage, and we don't have the ability to do what Russia's doing right now, which is to seamlessly transition into expanded defense production. In America, we had to stop providing HIMARS systems to our own military because we only have a limited production line, and it's exclusively producing HIMARS for the Ukrainians down the road because we don't have any left to give. That's replicated over and over and over again. The Germans keep saying they want to give them the Leopard tank. Hey, call up Turkey and ask how the Leopard tank fared against ISIS. Not too well. And, the Russians aren't ISIS. They're going to slaughter the Leopard tank. And the Germans don't have a better tank. And if they did, it would be a heavier tank with more toys, more things to break, because the Germans don't know how to build simple things. The Germans build very technically complex things. The same with the United States. Every time we seem to have a simple idea, let's take the F-35 fighter. On paper, simple. Stealth technology, with certain capabilities. But then we had to make it do everything. Air-to-air fighting, air-to-ground fighting, reconnaissance, this, that, and the other thing. And we overwhelmed the system, and we added it on. It was like an afterthought. So when you add something on, things start to break. And now we have the pilot's helmet, all the information. The pilot's going, I don't know anything. Click it all off because I got to go straight back to old, stick and rudder flying because none of this stuff works. And all of our equipment's that way. Everything. We don't build simple equipment anymore. And even if we did, we can't build it in sufficient quantity. So that's where we are right now and the war in Ukraine is pointing this out. The Russians are not only expanding production to support the war, but as you alluded to, they've expanded their military to meet new threats in Finland, Sweden, the Arctic, and elsewhere. 1.5 million active duty people, requiring the creation of new airborne divisions, Marine divisions. Why airborne and Marine? And this should tell the West something, because they're expeditionary forces. These are forces that can be taken from their bases and rapidly moved to other areas. And a Russian Marine division isn't like its American equivalent. It has tanks. It has artillery. It's basically, it's not just naval infantry. It's, amphibious combat, combined arms, combat capabilities. Same thing with the airborne. So, they're expanding their expeditionary capacity and their artillery. 10 more artillery divisions are being built. Why? Because large-scale ground combat is artillery intensive, as we're seeing in Ukraine. So Russia's doing everything necessary to expand its military capacity. Meanwhile, all NATO has is Jan Stoltenberg pathetic utterances back in June about 300,000 troops. We're going to build 300,000. And all the defense ministers in NATO went, what? Who? Us? Why don't you talk to us first before you throw out a number? We're going to expand battalions into brigades. Who's going to do this, Jan? You? No, us, and we can't do it. The Germans, our equipment don't work. We have 18 armored fighting vehicles and they all break down in the field. And now you want us to put a brigade out there? So, I think, we're coming to face to face with the fact of the matter is that the Russians have emerged from the post-Cold War era far stronger and far more capable than the West has.
I think you're right. And I think what we're looking at is a situation where the West has, as the old school people said, an alligator mouth and a Tweety bird ass. They got a lot of talk, but they're unable to back it up. And they've dug themselves a hole that they can't get out of. What I want to talk about next. Well, before we go, I do want to talk about Russia-China alliance but before we do, I do want to ask you to mention, to say something about this briefly. And that is, before we move everything to Rockfin, there was a big discussion about, everybody's up in arms about a HIMARS strike in which we've heard now 80 some Russian soldiers were killed. My immediate response is this. Unfortunately, you've said it on this show before. This is war. And everyone has very powerful pinpoint weapons. And there's going to be instances where Ukrainians take out some tanks, Russian soldiers hit a spot, and there's going to be instances where it goes the other way around. So I saw this as people are up in arms because it doesn't happen a lot. But it's unfortunate. It's terrible when people get killed. I wish the entire conflict would get quickly settled by diplomacy. But I see this. Unfortunately, it's just, this is the price and unfortunate cost of a military operation. Your thoughts on that?
Well, let me point two things out. One, on the same day that the Ukrainian HIMARS hit, I think it was school number 19, where the Russians had, for whatever reason, decided to billet, anywhere between 400 and 600 troops, according to some information. The Russians struck a former ice skating rink that had been converted into not only a deployment area, billeting facility for Ukrainian troops, but also was being used to offload high-value Western technology. And at the time of the strike, this included at least one HIMARS, two Vampire systems from the Czech Republic, and some advanced artillery systems from other NATO nations, plus a whole bunch of ammunition. And it all went boom and all went bye-bye. And the casualty figures for the Ukrainians are catastrophic. No one's talking about that. Instead, everybody's talking about 89 Russians. And look, that number is probably going to go higher. I mean, I'm not going to minimize what happened here. But this is war. I mean, look, at the end of the day, Russia's going to have to, and Putin's already doing this. He's ordered up a commission to say, how did this happen? Because it shouldn't have happened. It should not have happened. You should never have that many troops gathered in, that close proximity to the front line in a known facility, easily monitored by, whatever intelligence collection platforms. Right now, the big deal in Russia is that the conscripts were using, or the reservists were using cell phones, and the Ukrainians, who knows? But it happened. Let's just be clear about this. It doesn't change the trajectory of this conflict whatsoever. It's a tragedy, a human tragedy. There's going to be offensive operations that Russia's going to undertake in the near future that are going to cost the lives of thousands of Russian soldiers. Thousands of Russian soldiers are going to die. Let's just be clear about that. Thousands of Russian soldiers are going to die. Tens of thousands, if not over 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers are getting ready to die. It's going to be bloody. It's going to be horrible. It's going to be catastrophic. And so 89 Russian soldiers dying, even if that number goes up, while tragic, doesn't change the overall momentum and trajectory of this conflict. But here's the important thing, and this is the aspect of this reporting that I think is missed by many people. Why is this story such a big deal? How did this happen? It wasn't the Western media that picked up on this. It was so-called Russian bloggers There's a whole, they don't have the Twitter sphere that we have. They have Telegram, and there's a number of Telegram channels that are run by people who claim to be pro-Russian, but they're not. They're actually run by a handful of angry, bitter former fighters of the, who participated early on in 2014, 2015 in the early stages of the fighting in the Donbass, back when it was the Wild West and people could come in and set up their own little empires and do whatever they wanted to do. But then as control was brought in, organization, structure, etc., these cowboys got pushed aside because they couldn't integrate, and they're now angry. So they've spent a career just sniping at everybody, saying, you guys suck. We were the best. You should have done it our way. You're not doing it right. And they all hate Putin. And they're as anti-Putin as they can. So they take advantage of any opportunity to quickly say, see, we told you, the Russians suck. Putin sucks. The leadership is awful. Look, they've killed hundreds. The war's going to end. Oh, my God, the sky's going to fall. And they've been doing it from the very beginning of the conflict. That's why this story got going. And even you see, some Western outlets are saying that, acknowledging that this is a story that rose up in the Russian blogosphere, they call it. That's what's happening here. This is a story that, frankly speaking, serves a Ukrainian propaganda line that's being promulgated by bitter Russian bloggers who have a problem with Vladimir Putin, the Russian leadership, and the fact that this conflict's being waged without them. There's one guy named Strelkov. That's his nom de guerre, his war name. I think his real name is D. This is a guy who early on was accused of many crimes, because like I said, it was the Wild West in the Donbass and early on. And this guy was in there doing stuff, torturing people, beheading people, whatever you want to do. But he claimed he was winning the war, but he got pushed aside. He tried to make a comeback during the mobilization, tried to sneak back in, got caught, got sent home. And he's angry because he can't come in and save the day for the Russians. So he's out there. Anytime something like this happens, they just blow the story up. They've been blowing these stories up. I've been following them now for months. And it's just, it's just an irritant, because at the end of the day, they've never been right about anything. They've been wrong about everything, and they're wrong about this. Yes, people died. It's tragic. And if they had left it at that, I'd support them. It is tragic. But it's not reflective of a total collapse of Russian leadership. It's not reflective of the vacancy of common sense. It is a tragedy. But Russia's doing okay. It's not the end of the world. The sky has